Okay, so we're on our way. We just created another skill and we called it Create Gateway. So, what the Create Gateway, my goal here is to create Cognito skill, which created an instance of AWS Cognito. It created the client ID, the secret. I managed to get some source code to fetch the token and verify the attributes of the token. And so all of that went well. And what I have in my environment file is uh, properties which define the Cognito pool name, the client ID, the secret, etc., the Cognito domain. And now what we're doing is creating the Agentcore gateway. And so there's some variables here which got created, got populated, got defined, and so some of these were generated and populated, etc. So we'll take a look at that later. Bottom line is we want to take a look at this Agentcore skill that I created. Now, I told Claude to create me a Create Gateway skill. I told it what I wanted it to do. And as I told it, it created this file. It even looked at some variables I had defined and used it appropriately. So it generated a Python file to create the gateway. It used certain variables and defined certain variables. And so the steps for the skill were resolve prerequisites. So in environment, it called the identity, it looked up the account, it looked up the region in the properties file. It used my production account profile. And like I said, going back over here, I've got an AWS profile, a region, and I think I gave it this name, and it populated everything else. And the more it asked me questions, the more I gave answers, and there were certain things that were generated, and those things wound up in the properties file because I told Claude whatever it generates, put it in the properties file. So it actually was smart. It looked at my naming conventions and my properties and named things appropriately. Pretty amazing and pretty impressive. But now let's go back to this for a moment and let's see what it did. Okay, so it resolved the prerequisites. It created an IAM Lambda role. Now, one thing I was trying to determine is what should I do with the Agentcore? Should I create a runtime inside of Agentcore? Should I deploy a how do I do this? Do I use a container? Do I run a container for the endpoint? Like what am I doing? And so I let Claude tell me what to do, and Claude gave him a recommendation that I could have Agentcore call a Lambda, and the Lambda could create the runtime and point to my agent I had already created in Bedrock. So I have a multi-agent system in Bedrock. A master agent, which is an orchestration agent with a bunch of agents to do subtasks. And the master agents kind of used as a router. It forwards to specialized agents. And so basically, what I'm doing now in doing this and creating skills to create these things, I could create an agent from scratch, but I have agents in Bedrock, so I don't want to. It gave me the option to use the Agentcore as a secure layer into a URL, and that URL had a target which called the Bedrock existing agent. So I like that because I only because I already created my agent-based system in Bedrock, and I use serverless. I don't necessarily use Docker images that much, so we skipped the Docker step and the ECR registry and all that other stuff, which is not that complicated, but you can get it done. But I just connected it to my Bedrock agents. So my Agentcore gateway does that, and as Claude is telling me what it can do and what it can do, and it's updating files, I tell it to update the skill. So it created and deployed a Lambda, and the Lambda, instantiated the runtime and called my existing Bedrock agent. So that was something that asked me what I wanted. I say, yes, that's what I want. And I only did that as a shortcut because I had already created this agent-based system in Bedrock. And now Agentcore is now part of Bedrock, but my agent is not running in Agentcore. It's just running, and the bottom line is it's not really secure. So I put Agentcore, I put Agentcore Gateway, I put Cognito in front of it, so it uses client credentials, and I'm using those client credentials to access my Bedrock agents. So that was just a happy accident. Basically, Claude gave me that option. I said, yeah, let's go for it. But anyway, so it deployed the Lambda, created a role, invoked permissions, added permissions. It created a gateway, cleared existing target and created a new one. So what was happening is Claude was like, okay, trying to create the gateway. Something went wrong. Let me delete it. Let me try to create it again. Something went wrong. You could do this. You could do that. Pick an option. Do this. Clear out the gateway. Try to create it again. So it went through this iterative process, but I was making it sure that I was giving it instructions to update my skill file so that it happens properly. So the way this works is the skill will if you try to run the skill again, it'll notice that there's a gateway already there. I want to clear it out. It might even use some of my session state context to determine that. But you let it remove everything, let it recreate it all over again. And so what it was doing is it was recreating my Python files and updating them every time it told me there was an issue and I needed to fix something. So now at this point, the create gateway Python and the Lambda handler works. The Cognito Python, which has created the Cognito pool, might have to been run again. It eventually injected security into my Agentcore gateway. So I think this is all working. So let me go back over here, and so now the eighth task here was it was writing everything back into the environment, and these are all the variables that it wrote. And then it started using Bedrock Agentcore control in my code, and that gives it control over Bedrock to configure things more. So all of this happened. I believe it all eventually worked correctly, and the reason why I'm saying that is there is an Agentcore repo which creates a Python notebook, and you could run it and go through the cells of the notebook and run it. I ran it in PyCharm, and I did all of this work. So the code is in another project I have, It's actually in the Agentcore repo that comes with all the tutorials and everything. What I decided to do is do what I needed to do in Claude by creating these skills. And so this is a fresh pot of an implementation where this skill is creating a gateway. And I'm doing a lot of things here. Basically telling it to use MCP. I'm telling it to secure with Cognito. I'm telling it that use a Lambda to call my Bedrock agent. And like I said, I'm asking Claude, what order should I do this in? And Claude said, well, you can create the gateway, you can create the runtime, then you create the target, or you could do alternatives. And so I just managed to get something done. Now, with that said, I now have a create gateway skill. And if I'm right, if I remove these Python files and I create the Cognito and the gateway again, these things are going to get recreated. But Claude recognizes they're already there, and it only updates them if it needs to. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. But I do want to show you what I have here. Where am I? I'm in Bedrock Agentcore. Now my experiment really is, can Claude do what I want it to do? Can I get a second alternative to using Claude to do what I need to do? Or do I have to write all this code myself? So the answer to the question is Claude will write the code for you, and it will do it correctly. So that's the answer. Now, whether I want to work whether I want to work this way initially is a good idea, because basically what I could do is I could create resources. I'm generating the code. I could easily put it in a Jupyter notebook. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask Claude to put this stuff in a Jupyter notebook when I'm finished with everything. So just notice that the gateway does have it did create the gateway properly, and let me see what it's doing here. It's giving me some invocation code. Now I think I might have I think I initially copied this. I think I initially copied this even before I created my gateway, and I put it in the client.py file. But I want to use strands eventually, so if I do use this, I tell Claude to update it to use everything that it's supposed to use. But right now, I believe I took this one and Claude updated it, so it should look a lot like this right now. Let's go take a look. So it's using my environment file, so it's not going to look the same, but this is what I started out with. And I told Claude to change this thing a couple of times. Execute MCP, fetch access token. Let me go back and take a look at this. And this is a little more hard-coded, so like I said, I started out with something like this. Then I told Claude, use my property files and use other things, and it updated things on its own, even without me asking it. Updated things. But let me see. Yeah, so it looked like it used this thing. Maybe this is the one I did grab. Favorite token. Let me see. I think that's the one I grabbed. Yeah, this is the one I grabbed because I knew I wanted to call it via MCP, so I grabbed this one. Now, like I said, I really had plans on using Strands, but I wanted, so this is Strands MPC client. So I might change this. I don't think it's going to be a big deal, and I'll tell Claude to just change use the environment variables, and this should work. Why do I want to use Strands? It's just it's very user friendly. They all look simple. So anyway, point is, what is my point? My point is that my gateway was created, and I have home task gateway HL. If you look in the code, you look at the environment, agent gateway ID has an HL at the end of it, so it took that value after they created the gateway and put it in here, and really that's all I really wanted to show. And notice the lambda handler wound up calling the SDK, the Bedrock agent runtime, and pointing to my agent that I created in Bedrock. So this was an important piece of code. And like I said, I'm going to say this again. If you go to Agentcore and download the repo with the tutorials and everything, it's really worth going through. Now I'm going through those tutorials, and I created an Agentcore videos on YouTube. And you'll see, if you look at one of those videos, and you'll see how beautiful it is. The code, you don't have to modify. You're just running a Jupyter notebook and executing the code and seeing the results in Amazon. Then of course it has a cleanup script. So at the end of the Jupyter notebook, it has a cleanup script. But that is a good way to get started with these Bedrock and Agentcore. What I'm doing here is I'm trusting Claude to create all the code, but I'm verifying everything, and I know that AWS has written code very similar to this to generate these things, right? They might have put the create cognito Python in a function. I just have it in the main program, but I'm doing a good job here as well. And so I just want to compare methods. Okay, with that said, is there anything else here? Now, we didn't have a runtime. We didn't have a runtime because we're not using Agentcore for the runtime. We're using the SDK to create a runtime in the Lambda function. But what else surprised me is I will have to check my Amazon Cognito, how it's injected into my gateway that it's using. Let's see if there's any parameters here. This is a role to talk out. So this is my inbound auth. Notice this is fantastic because I just told Claude to do it. So Claude in the skill created a gateway and used the Cognito provider as for authentication. And this was my target. It was my Lambda. My target name was my Lambda that created a runtime that called my agent in Bedrock. So so all of this went well. I'll give a more comprehensive video later. Where's my where is my video? Okay, so we're gonna end this now on a good note. What do we have to do next? We have Cognito, we have the gateway. I do have my Bedrock agent. I mean, I'm assuming that there's an IAM role to call my Bedrock agent, because Lambda has an IAM role, and that's being used to call Bedrock. So I noticed that Claude made sure I had the permissions from the Lambda to call Bedrock. So there is an IAM role being used. And the only thing that's a little indifferent is my Agentcore my runtime is not running in my Agentcore. So I got to figure out what that means. The ultimate question I'm asking myself is, I'm not attached to a VPC here. My Lambda is not attached to a VPC. I am possibly going out to the internet and coming back. I'll have to check that and see how secure this solution really is. But the Lambda is executed. When the Lambda executes, it might be executed from the internet. So I'll have to check that. But the goal is to put the Lambda in a VPC and make sure everything's running in a VPC. So I just want to point that out. Anyway, we made a lot of progress with this. Just keep in mind that you can create skills too, but be careful what you ask for. I mean, this is a situation where I know I've created these things before in a different Amazon environment using Python. I know what to expect. Claude is doing the correct thing, and it is asking me the correct questions. So anyway, that's it for today. Let me move on with the next step. Thanks for watching.